The Lounge, proudly brought to you by Johnny Walker. Keep walking.
Good evening and welcome to The Lounge. From the Equator Bar at Papao Royal Beach Hotel, I'm Kwaku. The Lounge is brought to you by Johnny Walker. Keep walking. On November 25th, Cuba's revolutionary leader and one of the giants of the 20th century, Fidel Castro, passed away aged 90. He had been in power since 1959 through a guerrilla war and outlasted 10 US presidents, despite hundreds of attempts to assassinate or overthrow him. Cuba, a third world country, has one of the world's best healthcare systems and 100% literacy. Thousands of Ghanaians were educated on the island on scholarship. But Castro has also been criticized, slammed for the human rights situation in Cuba. Well, I have two people here who lived in Cuba and met Fidel Castro. Also, as Ghanaians vote on December 7th, I have two artists with me who have respectively endorsed Nana Akufo-Addo and John Mahama. They will tell us why and weigh in as well on Castro. So let me welcome Professor Kwaku Danso-Boafo. He was ambassador to Cuba from 1997 to 2000. Later on, of course, he was also High Commissioner to the United Kingdom, published the book, J.J. Rawlings and the Democratic Transition in Ghana, for which he got into a spot of bother. And I think he's a man of, he courts a bit of controversy. He also has this one, the political biography of Dr. Kofi Abrefa-Bozia, for which some people also took him to task. But that's not why we're here. And of course, he met Fidel Castro many times. We'll show you some pictures from his album, Treasured Moments with Fidel. Also here, my friend David Ampofo. David studied in Cuba for 4 years. David is, of course, Chief Executive of Channel 2, journalist, broadcaster. He spent 4 years studying in Cuba, also met Fidel Castro. He studied political leadership. You should be starting, or, well, you should be in the thick of this election, shouldn't you, David? After all you learned in Cuba. And of course, you can...
There's a time for everything.
Time for everything. Okay, and yes, the other two gentlemen are here, so come on guys, join us. Let's hit the road. Let me fill my glass and cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers, David. Okay, so let's hit the road then. So, hi. Feel free. Relax. It's you don't have to whisper. A+. So, Fidel passed away at the age of 90. Of course, it didn't come as a surprise. Hi, Abeiku. How's it? I'm good. Excellent. Good. So, it didn't come, of course, as a surprise. He'd been ill for a long time, but. How did you take it, Professor Boafo? Danso-Boafo.
Well, good evening, and let me first of all say that I'm very happy, quite excited to be here. This is the first time I've been on this show. In fact, I had no idea you had such a show until you called me, when was it? Yesterday or 3 days ago. To say that I was saddened would be an understatement, because I have been a student of Cuba and probably more a student of Fidel. I had admired the man from his nationalism, his dedication to the cause of Cuba, his sense of camaraderie in terms of devoting half of his life to the struggle of African peoples, his selfless contribution to the liberation of not just Angola, Namibia, and even South Africa, but his own attempt to get rid of the remnants of colonialism on the African continent. Guinea-Bissau, as you know, he made significant contribution to the cause of Amilcar Cabral before anybody even thought of PAIGC. He had already sent expeditionary forces,
which was the political party that led the independence movement.
Cape Verde and Guinea-Bissau. He had also linked up with Frantz Fanon, Ahmed Bembela in Algeria. He had linked up, as we all know, with the forces after the demise of our comrade Patrice Lumumba. In fact, he was in the Congo, not actually fighting, but he had done the survey and had sent Che, of course, Captain Chikacha.
Che Guevara.
Che Guevara, yeah. If I say Che because I'm so familiar with some of these names, you have to help me to put the meat to the bones. But his main commitment to the liberation movement in Southern Africa, all too often when we talk about the release of Nelson Mandela from prison, where the US, Western powers, and of course every other country rejoices in it, I would venture to argue that had there not been the contribution, the dedication, and intervention by Cuban forces, the 30,000 or so Cuban forces, I don't think we would have been able to defeat apartheid. Western propaganda wants to relegate this to just a minute aspect of the Cuban contribution to Africa. But those of us who research Cuba have come to the conclusion that had it not been for the Cuban forces, the role they played in the liberation of Angola, there is no way the defeat, the classic defeat of the South African forces, there is no way the South African
in Namibia
apartheid regime, we'll get to Namibia, apartheid regime would have been defeated, and Nelson Mandela would not have been released. And I think Africa owes Cuba a huge debt that it probably can never pay.
And of course, by Cuba, when he talks about the role that Cuba played in Angola, he's actually talking about fighters, people coming to, Cubans coming to Angola, who actually fought to defeat South African insurgents and boots on the ground.
And later on, doctors, engineers, builders. It's just extraordinary. I mean, it is important that young people in Africa everywhere get to know who Fidel Castro is. It is an injustice if that doesn't happen. I mean, a one single leader, revolutionary leader, sitting in Latin America somewhere. A country, Cuba is made up of blacks, of Spanish, of the Indian, the mix. You know, he said once, and I loved it, that nosotros somos Latino Africanos. We are Latin Africans, not Latino Americanos. It's extraordinary. You talk about Latin Americans, we are Latin Africans. The whole part of Cuba, Santiago de Cuba, African people. The dance, the music. We sit here, we think it's so far away. You talk about Cuba, people don't even listen to it. When I arrived in Cuba, 2 nights after I arrived, I was making my way out, go and look around at some pub on the beach and all that. As I was approaching the place, the music sounded to me like I was listening to Papa Yankson or something. I thought, hang on, there's something happening to me here. That's how extraordinary it was in so far away a land. I was listening to music that reminded me of my home.
No, I think
it's amazing.
Oh, okay.
Yes, amazing. The Nigerian thing, that whole thing. It's just a fascinating country. So just to go back to your point, yes, 30,000, 25, 30,000 troops sent. This is what they call the Battle of Kitukana Valley in 1988, when the South Africans were running riot and they were removed, they were expelled. So yes, he's right. I mean, the man is a hero of Africa. I've been looking around to see even how African leaders will respond to his death.
So you're saying that because very often when you think of when the narrative about Fidel Castro is more in relation to his Cuba's confrontation with the United States and its place in the Cold War, but not so much about Africa.
Correct.
And the role that Cuba played in the liberation of parts of Central and Southern Africa. And the relationship between Ghana and Cuba.
Correct.
You know, where you were one of the first 4 to study, and of course afterwards, thousands of Ghanaian students. I myself visited to do a report on Ghanaian students studying there.
Kwaku.
And then of course the medical brigades.
I remember the night where I was standing at Jose Marti International Airport when the kids were beginning to arrive to come to secondary school in Cuba. We were there till 3 o'clock in the morning, just helping process them and take them through. Young would come to study somewhere. They were not the only people, there were students from all over the world. There was 22,000 foreign students in Cuba when I lived there, between 1982 and 1986. I mean, it was the home of so many. The guy just had such a big heart. Castro was a humanist. He was an internationalist. He understood that it was not just about him. And if it wasn't working somewhere else, then it wasn't working for him either.
Right.
Especially if he shared it. It was really fascinating to have an individual like that. And you are right, the narrative is controlled by the Western media. I've been watching since he died. I'm watching news about people celebrating Miami. I'm not from Miami. I'm not from against Castro. I mean, if I didn't run away to go to Miami, we live in Africa. They helped Africa. So my story of Castro is a little different from the people in Miami. If they want to dance and laugh that Castro died, they are welcome to. They probably have a good reason to. I also have a good reason to remember him fondly.
So you've got this, Professor Kwaku Danso-Boafo, you've got here a few photographs that I want us to dig into. This one was this occasion.
You know, when we talk about Fidel, I think we most of the time talk about his revolutionary activities, how he moved on from Moncada to Mexico, his probably classic history will absolve me document his defense when he was being tried, to arriving at the Sierra Maestra, staying in there for a period of 2 years.
Because he initially staged, attempted to overthrow the system in 53,
Yes,
did not succeed, was tried and imprisoned before he succeeded in 59.
Yes.
Okay,
and
so
if you look at that background, the kinds of struggles he waged, imprisonment in Mexico, he was also imprisoned in Mexico, not just in Cuba, and taken 82 individuals, covering the Gulf of Mexico all the way to Havana, and arriving at a spot where they were attacked by the Batista forces. The entire 82 gentlemen and some ladies he was with was nearly decimated. Only 21 survived. You know, and how they survived in the mountains and eventually defeated Batista in January 1959. It's something that history has not recorded properly. We have not given him the credit as a military strategist. And I would mention, at this meeting where President Rawlings had visited Cuba, this was in 1998, I think.
So I see President Rawlings, I see Nana Kunedu.
And I'm in the corner there.
You're in the corner.
And we're talking about, we're discussing whether or not we should get a new aircraft for the president. And some,
you want to take a look at it?
Some airplanes for the Air Force. So he kept going through various types of airplanes, and here is President Rawlings.
That's Prof.
A former pilot, an Air Force officer. He sits there and he asks Fidel, "How come you know so much about military aircraft and all that?" He said, "Look, in the revolution, we had to learn about every single thing." Fidel has one of the best memories that one could think of. In this photograph, the president of Cape Verde at the time had visited. And as usual, I always had a Ghana flag in my lapel. So he comes to me and says, "Ever since you arrived here, every time I see you, you have this pen."
Ha ha ha. So that's this photograph.
That's it. That is it. No, here he is asking the question, why, are you the only country with a flag and a lapel pin? This is the question he was asking me. And he said, "Let me see it. Let me hold it." So he holds it, and then he turns to me, "Does your government require you to wear this all the time?" And he remembered at every instance where I had this on. And I could not believe it. Here was a man at that age, a man who could give 7-hour speeches, who could remember history, philosophy, Remember when President Rawlings came, he gave 4 hours of African history. And that is most of the Africans in Cuba. And for those individuals who do not know, nearly half of the Cuban population is African. And most of the Africans in Cuba were taken from Nigeria. There are a few individuals who were taken from Ghana. And of course, therefore, they are very much interested in Kinte and some of our Ghanaian stuff. But they haven't lost much of their Africanness. The culture, the dancing, the drumming. If you see some of them performing bobobo and stuff, you think you are right here at Bukom or somewhere. And they have deliberately cultivated this and kept it. You know, they have a center, the Fernando Ortiz African Study Center. Fantastic place where they do research into everything. But again, as a former health minister, I am very much aware of the contributions the Cuban doctors have made to our country. University for Development Studies, Tamale, for instance, when we set up the medical school, we hardly had medical lecturers. I recruited the first 12 Cuban professors to teach medicine at UDS. Had it not been for them, the medical school would not have survived. It's on record. You can go in there and check. There have been some arguments as to whether or not we should have Cuban doctors as opposed to Ghanaian doctors. Why don't we use the resources we spend on Cuban doctors or Ghanaian doctors? When we bring in Cuban doctors, we provide the most minimal accommodation, the most minimal furniture. At times we get apartments for them without any furniture. The medical doctors who came to teach at UDS, for instance, there were 12 of them. No one had a car. No one had a bicycle. There was a problem. As Minister for Health at the time, I assigned them one Nissan Patrol, which broke down just about every time. I said, don't worry about it. We're here to serve. We're not here to enjoy luxuries. And we're giving them $50 in allowance per month. You know, and we for some reason, we have not been able to explain these kinds of things to the Ghanaian population, and therefore, there was some resentment towards some of the Cuban doctors. But Fidel said, look, I have all these doctors. Your job is to bring in, as long as you have aircraft to take them back to Africa, you can take as many as you want. Yeah. And there wasn't an African country that did not have Cuban doctors, including South Africa.
Let's take a moment and toast to authentic whiskey. Let's toast to Johnnie Walker, the original taste of whiskey. Since 1820, Johnnie Walker has remained the world's #1 Scotch whiskey and has won numerous awards for excellence. This because Johnnie Walker comes from an intricate blend of a wide spectrum of carefully selected flavors, giving it that unique taste, savored by millions all over the world. So let's toast to the unquestionable taste of whiskey. Johnnie Walker, the whiskey the world knows best. Johnnie Walker, keep walking. Drink responsibly, not for sale to persons under 18 years and pregnant women. You're watching The Lounge. We're taking a quick break. We'll be back in just a minute.